Hello and welcome to another episode of the Wildcast podcast. This is Michael Lev, senior writer and columnist for the Arizona Daily Star. I am joined today by Bruce Pascoe, our intrepid men's basketball reporter, who's been everywhere with the Wildcats. How long have you been with the Star covering the Wildcats, Bruce?
Well, I've been the Star since '96, but I was covering baseball for a while and haven't really covered them until about '99, 2000.
All right, so over 2 decades of experience covering Arizona men's basketball. He's seen and done everything. And we're going to break down all things Arizona men's basketball here. We're recording this a few days ahead of the game against UCLA up in Phoenix on Saturday, December 14th. That's a big one. We have, something of a sample size of Arizona hoops so far this year. They've played 8 games. They're 4-4. What's your overall assessment, Bruce, of this 2024-25 season, what we've seen so far from the Wildcats?
Well, I just think it's unusual for a Tommy Lloyd team, but they're still kind of putting it together. They're a little bit disjointed, but that's, it's kind of one of those things where they're replacing 4 starters, and that's kind of the bottom line. And they, and not only that, but they've had trouble figuring out the 6th and 7th pieces to their rotation. And, we saw the other day where he's now switching Carter Bryant for KJ Lewis at the 3, and that may be an answer. There's a lot of things still in motion. And on top of that, I think they've had this really, pretty tough November schedule. And that's the kind of schedule you want when you've got a lot of veterans like the team they did last year. Maybe not so great an idea when, you've got this much transition going on. But it just, works out that way. It's hard, especially in this day and age, it's hard to predict what your team's going to be like from year to year, and you're scheduling usually a year or 2 out. And so it's a tough deal there.
I think as a society, we always want answers. We want clarity. As media, we're the same way. What's the starting lineup? What do the rotations look like? And the reality is, you can't just microwave a basketball team, right? Like, these things do take time, and they're in a process right now of figuring out what their personnel looks like, how the pieces fit together. Who should come off the bench? Who should start? Very intriguing move the other day to bring KJ Lewis off the bench. I guess that was somewhat initiated by him to do that, and he had, by a lot of measures, the best game of his career in doing that. Now, granted, it was against Southern Utah, which is not, it's not UCLA. So we'll see how that goes. But what do you make of just kind of the ever evolving roles and rotations that we've seen so far? Do you think that that's just normal and eventually he'll settle on something? Is it something that fans should be a little bit concerned about because we're in December already and they're still figuring things out?
Yeah, I always think actually, November and December I think journalistically and following a team, I think they're the most interesting part of the years because all this stuff is developing. Like, sometimes the league season is just more, of a grind, and, the games are great, but like the real kind of team coming together happens now. And yeah, again, we're not seeing it quite happening yet. And I think the danger for Arizona is they've got UCLA up front and they're still going through this. And if they lose this game, they're really, looking at 6 and 5 at best entering the Big 12. And that's probably not a place you want to be if you're, trying to get to the NCAA tournament. You don't want to put that kind of pressure on for the season. But that's, that's where they are right now. I think it's a little bit unusual for this team, but I do think that I think they're going to make some of these things are going to cement in the next couple of weeks, certainly after Christmas. And, I think Tommy Lloyd said he doesn't want to go on too long. He thinks that's good for players to know, to have a certainty about where they're going to be and when they're going to get in the game and all that. And, again, the first 3 years, he had that in place pretty much by now, with the exception of Pelle Larsson swapping out with Seth Henderson in January a couple of years ago. Usually it's been pretty set, but usually with those 3 previous teams, you had more veteran guys and guys in place. There weren't that many questions entering the season, about what was going to happen. And, this is a little bit unusual. There's still a lot of, he may have a deeper pool of talent to choose from, but in a way that's actually making it trickier because they're having to fit more pieces in. Whereas before he had a 7-8 man rotation most of the first 3 years. And, it was pretty set by now.
And maybe it's not the same every game. Maybe it's sometimes it's matchup dictated, what that rotation looks like.
I thought that, especially with the bigs, he's got Tobe Waka and Mo Krivas in there, and they're really different players. And I thought maybe that could be something I do. And I've asked him about it. And maybe, is kind of the answer. But he likes a set rotation. So I think, I don't think they're going to do that. But, we'll see. Maybe this is the team to experiment with that, because he's got that going, and maybe even that 3 spot and possibly even the 4. He could tweak around a little bit. You could make an argument against a smaller opponent. Maybe you start Trey Townsend at the 5. But I don't think they're going to do that. Or Henry Vasar. Where does he, fit in? And you could make a really good argument for doing that. But I think Lloyd prefers the certainty of having pretty set rotation, and maybe just tweaking it within a rotation from game to game, maybe a little bit. We'll see.
So they have cruised through November, right? Or previously under Tommy Lloyd.
Yeah, they've never lost a game until this year. Not a single game in November. And, Lloyd was, I remember when they won at Duke last year, I asked him about it, and he said something like, you don't get championships, you don't get trophies for winning your second game of the year. And he's right. You don't. Back in the day, Lute Olson, if you ran the NCAA tournament at the end of November, he probably have 5 championships. It's not where it happens. It's college basketball. It's defined by March. And so,
That's right.
That's the thing. That's probably the good thing if you're looking at it for Arizona. Like, if they get all this stuff together and they get on a roll, nobody's going and they get to this Final Four, nobody's going to remember November, or they're going to look back on it like as a good thing that it got this team together. So there's in that sense, it's nothing to really panic about. It's not like football where you can't lose too much or you can't get in the playoff or whatever. It's, they just have to make sure they get in the tournament, and they're actually, they're already, I guess if you consider they're a bubble in December, they would be on it right now, but they got plenty of time to get that going.
The point I was going to make is exactly what you said. Like, they've cruised through November and then they faltered in March. Yeah. And wouldn't you rather peak in spring than in the fall? I think you would. Right. There's no guarantee just because they're struggling now that they'll actually be better later on. But I will say, based on the schedule that they've faced and the conference that they're going into, that they will be battle tested. Like, no question about it. The problem is, if your record is not good enough, you're not going to make the tournament. But I feel like if they're, so you said what, 6-5, let's say, maybe 7-4 at the end of the preseason. Let's say they go, what if they went 11-9? And you're like, that's a sub 20 win regular season, which still might be good enough to get into the tournament because of how much respect the Big 12 has. Does that make sense? We lost Bruce.
Sorry about that. Are you there?
No, go ahead, Bruce. Yep, lost you for a second.
It froze up on me for a second. I couldn't hear it. I'm sorry.
All good.
Exactly what you said. But basically, to your point, like, yeah, it's a lot about momentum. And, you could make the argument that Arizona, if it gets itself together and establishes a rotation, maybe even a rotation that goes 8, 9, maybe even 9.5, if Conrad Martinez is, in there in some sort, that is a rotate. If that works, that is a rotation that maybe has a little more potential to go, into March and into the tournament. Because I think you could make the argument that certainly 2 years ago when they lost to Princeton, that team was down to 7-man rotation, and that didn't go well. There were a couple guys banged up going into that game, and it really cost them. They had nowhere to turn. And I think, the other two teams, eight guys, generally speaking, not not a whole lot of depth, especially if you have foul trouble or injuries or whatever. So this team, it has potential still, but they've got a lot of figuring out to do. And again, it's a weird deal in college basketball where it really is all about the end. And it's going to be really interesting with Arizona because they're going to end at Iowa State on a Saturday, the following Saturday at Kansas, the following Saturday in the Big 12 tournament. Yeah, that's really tough. How are they going to be banged up at that point? Or if they can get it together in the next month, 6 weeks, maybe they get through that, in a reasonable way. And then they get into the tournament, having figured it out. And like you said, being battle tested, but they've got the real next 4 to 6 weeks is really going to be critical.
Yeah. One more big picture type of question I want to ask you before we get into some of the nitty gritty about the roster and the personnel. And that is, do fans need to reset their expectations a little bit when it comes to this Big 12 gauntlet that they're about to face? I feel like, especially in recent years, we've gotten used to Arizona kind of cruising through the Pac-12. They'll have the occasional blip here or there, but they're going 15-5 or 16-4 or whatever. And I don't think that's going to happen in the Big 12. But you can go 500 or a little above 500 in that league and still get a really good seed in the tournament. And there's nothing you won't see beyond the Big 12 that you haven't already seen in the Big 12. So what do you make of that idea of fans maybe needing to recalibrate?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably it's already happened. I mean, if it hasn't happened, it's going to happen. I mean, they were picked 5th. I mean, and that was when they were still ranked, the preseason ranking of whatever it was, 12, I think, or something. And, and since then they've been 4-4. So if you reset your expectation for the Big 12 right now, I mean, Arizona's a mid-level team at best. They lost to West Virginia, which was picked 13th. So I think it's kind of a must. And if Arizona happens to go 12-8 or better, then I think a lot of people are going to be pretty excited, but they do have to reset. And if that hasn't already happened, it's got to happen. It's a whole different deal. In fact, it's really, you look around the sports, there's a lot of programs at Arizona that probably have an easier time of it in the Big 12. Men's basketball is much tougher, or it looks like it's going to be much tougher.
Who did that poll for the Big 12? Is that a coaches poll or a media poll?
I believe that one was coaches. Yeah. And so the other, all the head coaches, and then sometimes they patch them off to guys, but I've heard generally they were doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. They know about as much as we do.
Which,
I mean, the football media poll which I did not vote in personally, but it was terrible. I mean, Arizona State was picked to finish last and they ended up first. I think with the roster turnover that we have in both men's basketball and football, that it is really difficult to get a gauge on what these teams are going to be like, because you just don't know how all the pieces are going to fit together, what the chemistry is going to be like when guys have new roles that they didn't have before, how that's going to work. So I don't know. Those are fun. They give you some kind of a gauge, some kind of a way to kind of set a narrative for the season, but it often turns out that narrative is false.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, sometimes like the Pac-12, it was a media poll. Like they polled all of us, generally 2 or 3 people in each market around the league, people who followed it a lot. And the coaches probably have, they certainly have better insights in a lot of ways, but you also wonder, do they just know teams? Because I mean, across the board, you could make the argument that the Pac-12 teams that went into the Big 12 in men's basketball generally were picked pretty low. I mean, Arizona being picked 5th, and then I believe Colorado, ASU, and Utah were all picked in the last 11 teams, I believe, or from 11 to 16. So it's a question of, do they know, what Tad Boyle has, as well as they might know what Jerome Tang has at Kansas State. I mean, there might be a little bit of that, but we'll see. I mean, certainly ASU has looked like they're a lot better than they were predicted, and Arizona so far is a question mark. And we'll see. But it could turn out to be the same thing's true in men's basketball as was in football.
Team wise, there's a stat that we were talking about before we began the podcast about assists. You look at their team-wide total for assists, it was over 18 each of the last 2 years, and it's at 16 currently. I know Ken Palm has a stat that kind of looks at that category a little bit differently. Why do you think their assists have been down slightly, and is that a big deal?
Yeah, I think it is a big deal, especially for this team, because it's so much about passing and ball movement and setting other guys up. And I think it speaks to the fact that they are a little disjointed. The rotation's a little bit, guys aren't used to working with each other. I mean, last year was pretty well tuned. Last couple of years, I mean, with Tubelis and then with Umar Ballo, you knew how to get the ball in, and it was worked pretty well for getting the assists a lot higher. So you expected that number was going to be down a little bit this year, but it's down quite a bit, and it should be higher than that by their standards. I think that the number you're referring to, Michael, is the simple ratio assists to made field goals, and that's sort of a pace adjusted way of looking at how many assists to are they doing. Mm-hmm. And I think right now they are setting up 51% of their made field goals with assists. They rank, what is it, in 192 out of about 360 Division I teams or whatever it is this year. So that's pretty average, a little below average, and a little surprising, honestly. And so it speaks to the rotation, and it's I think some of it. Well, there's a lot of ways to look at it, but I think it's just generally, the offense is just not performing at, its usual efficiency under the way Tommy Loy's had it right here. I mean, overall, I think they're still pretty decent efficiency, but it's also, early. We've got only 8 games to look at that. And those 4 losses that they have were all against high major teams. So, we'll see. Maybe, we'll see how the number plays out in the next month or so.
Yeah, I would say that the most enigmatic player on the team, without question, to me anyway, is Caleb Love. Was the Pac-12 Player of the Year last year in his first year at Arizona. Had his best numbers that he's ever had, but also really slumped at the end of the season.
Yeah,
came back, which was something of not a surprise in a way, and he's really not rediscovered his form. I mean, he's at 37.2% from the field, 29.5% from three. He averaged 4 free throw attempts per game last year. This year, he's averaging only 1.5. So he's not driving. He's not getting to the line. This is someone who was a preseason first-team All-American, if I'm not mistaken. So what do you make of where Caleb Love's game is at, where his head is at, and can things change in a positive direction for him?
Well, they can. I mean, he's streaky, and the good thing is he's been there before. He's been around college. This is his 5th year. He's been in the Final Four, and he's seen and done it all, kind of. But he is in a slump, and you're right. I mean, it started late last season, and and then he went to the combine or the G League camp, tested the draft process. I think he had a more efficient year last year, but they probably want to see more out of him. And then I think maybe it's hard to tell where his mind's at, because he does say the same things all the time, and he's pretty upbeat, and he says he's going to keep going. He's not going to let things affect him. But he did say that he was going into this thinking he was going to work on 3-point shooting more, and then he said, I got to drive it more. This is right before actually I talked to him before in the Bahamas. I talked to him before those 3 games, and he was saying that he's really wanted to focus on driving more and getting to the line. Did that a little bit against in that first game against Davidson. But his 3-point shooting has still not been there on a consistent level. Like you said, 29.5%. That's not All-American 3-point shooting for a guard. It's, but he might get there. I mean, we saw last year, I mean, he had a number of, really impressive games, broke the scoring record at Oregon. I mean, he's done things like that, and that's probably still going to happen this year. But, right now it's been a little bit rough. So I think it's kind of been, maybe that emphasis on threes, maybe it was too much. Maybe it threw off his game. Instead of just doing what he does, he started thinking too much. And, like shooters, it's never a good thing when, mentally it's very easy for them, to get in a mental rut, one way or another. And I think that's part of it. And obviously being a first team All-American, preseason put some pressure on you. He also has the additional pressure being the only one of those starters that is returning. They're replacing 4, and then he's the one guy. And, so there's a lot on his shoulders. And then, the X factor is you never know what's around him as far as, friends, family, social media, whatever that may or may not be getting to him. I don't know if that's a factor or not, but there's just a lot for him to handle. I think it's been difficult for him.
Yeah, I can't imagine he's in a great headspace in terms of his confidence right now. When you just don't see the ball going through the basket as much as you're used to, that has to affect you to some degree. I would love to see him drive the ball more because he's really fast. He's quick. He's explosive. He can get past people. And to me, like get to the line. Like talk about the most uncontested shot there is, right?
Yeah.
It's that one. And we've seen him do it at times. It's just not been consistent. And I don't know. It was a weird year that he had, a weird ending, I should say, to the year that he had last year. And it is definitely surprising to see that it is carried over to some degree, but there is still time to turn things around. Someone who is shooting really well from 3-point range is Anthony Del Orso. And I got to tell you, when I watched him against Duke, I was like, man, I'm not sure this guy belongs at this level. He looked completely overwhelmed and out of place. And that is, that's Duke. They've got a bunch of lottery picks on their team, a bunch of length. But he's really turned things around since then and become a very valuable bench player, providing something that they really need, which is outside shooting. I've been impressed. What have you thought of the way
I mean, I think
his season around?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry. He's been doing now what I thought he would do from the beginning, and I think it was just him getting a little bit of confidence going, and and then finding his comfort level out there. I think probably one of probably the biggest adjustment for him is, he was the leading scorer. Campbell shot, I think it was 38% from 3 or something. Really like, he was the guy there, and now he's like the 7th, 8th guy, and has to come in cold and get things going, find his rhythm and all that. And that can be difficult for guys. And he has done that in the last 3 or 4 games here, I think. Because that's kind of what I thought. I thought, that was an interesting piece that they got him out of the portal, whereas it was interesting at the time because they got him and they weren't sure Caleb Love was still testing the process. So I think the indication was they wanted him if he was willing to be a reserve if Caleb Love came back. And he was, and then that's where he's in. But it's a different role for him to play. But it's a nice luxury for Arizona to have if he plays the way he has lately. And that's what that's kind of the high side of what they expected.
Yeah, he was their leading scorer, and just like Trey Townsend was the leading scorer for Oakland. So that is an adjustment for those guys when they come into a situation like this. I remember Tommy talking about how good of an ISO player Trey Townsend was, and I've seen them do that a couple times, maybe where he's kind of isolated on the block a little bit. But that's not what the system is here. They're not going to run their offense through Trey Townsend. So that's a big adjustment for him and for Del Orso or anyone coming from maybe a smaller school when they come up here is, again, going back to our overall theme, how do you fit in? How do you fit all those pieces together?
Right. No, that's a good point, because you could make the argument that for Townsend is actually a bigger adjustment, even though he's starting. You're right. They're not running stuff for him as much as he's creating a lot of his own, and then he's getting some out of the rhythm of this offense. Whereas at Oakland, it was like, he was the guy, and then they went through a lot. The ball went through him a lot, and so that is different. And anytime you move up to this level, it's different. I think Townsend probably had more experience playing against high majors than Del Orso did, but Del Orso had a couple of games. I think he played at NC State once, and now he's kind of getting comfortable with it. I think probably, even though he had probably his most shooting against, I think what David said was the game he really went off. But I think the fact that he came in against West Virginia and Oklahoma and still hit some shots, in the right spots, kind of showed that he was more comfortable, playing at that level against those kind of defenses. So it'll be interesting to see what he does against UCLA, because they're really, really, really good defensive team.
Yes, we will get to UCLA very soon. I got one more personnel question for you. I posited in my latest news and views column that maybe we should see a little bit more of Conrad Martinez. Like maybe it's worth a try to experiment with him and see if like what he showed against Southern Utah is something that he can do against everybody. He doesn't have a turnover yet this season. Most of that has come in, what quote unquote garbage time, even though Adia Barnes said last night at the game that I was at that there's no such thing as garbage time. Like these minutes matter for everybody. If there was anything that was ever approaching garbage time, it was that fourth quarter against Cal State Bakersfield. Let me tell you, that was like a pickup game. But anyway, Conrad had career high minutes the other day. Positive assist to turnover ratio. There was this stat I found on Stat Broadcast, floor percentage, where it's like the percentage of time that a point is scored when you have a possession, and he was 100%.
Yeah.
So should we see more Conrad Martinez? Can he bring something to the table that they might need, and would that maybe work?
That's literally, I ask Tommy Lloyd that question probably once every couple of weeks. Like, what is Conrad's status? Is he somebody you can rely on? And every time he'll say, I believe in him. He deserves a shot. He's solid and all this stuff. I think,
and you're like, you're the one who makes those decisions, Tommy.
I know. And that's the thing. Like, so, and if you look at the numbers, like he's not playing them when it's crunch time, or even, I think he had a handful of minutes against Wisconsin, but for the most part, he's not playing against the high major teams. He didn't play against West Virginia or Oklahoma at all. And that may be somewhat to do with matchup, but I think it's, I think a lot of it is just that he's looking at the alternatives. Like he can go to KJ Lewis at point guard if he has to rest Bradley. And I think overall likes what Lewis brings, he doesn't want to lose Lewis being on the floor. I think that's kind of what it is. If I had to guess at it, just
why can't they play? They could play together.
They could, but I'm just saying, like you take some minutes away, maybe that results in shaving more minutes from Love or Bradley or something like that when you go down the line, and if you're playing those two together. That's what I'm saying. And then you got Del Orso, grabbing minutes, and then Carter Bryant, and so there is that. There's a opportunity cost, so to speak, of giving him minutes that you're taking away or whatever from other guys. So that's part of it. I do think it's sincere that he does think highly of Martinez, which, but I think it's just, there's only so many minutes around, and he's found enough of a solution at point guard without him out there. But that could change. I think it'll be really key. It'll be interesting to see Saturday against UCLA. Does he trust Martinez to play against these guys at this level? I don't know. It's because his game is pretty solid. He has the height disadvantage, of course, but against most everybody. But he's been pretty solid. Not a lot of mistakes in his game. Careful ball handler, doesn't turn the ball over much. And he's been pretty decent assist guy too. So I'm as interested in anybody like you to see what happens, because I think he's a really interesting potential. I mean, this team potentially could have an 8-man rotation plus a couple extra pieces, maybe even a 9-man rotation, and plus Martinez in spots, and that could be a good thing if they work it out. But it remains to be seen.
I think there's definitely a spot for him to play 10 to 12 minutes a game. And he comes in maybe 5 minutes in the first half and 5 minutes in the second half, and provides just a different look, spark. He is what I would call a pure point guard. I don't think Jaden Bradley is a pure point guard. He's more of, I don't know what you call like a lead guard, maybe. So I don't know. I think there's just he brings something different, which and that thing might be of value.
Yeah, and the other piece of that is, I don't know if that's going to happen, but because I do think it's, he's looking at minutes again that he doesn't want to take away from some of these other guys. But you could look at Jaden Bradley and say, he's not quite as efficient as he was last year when he wasn't playing very much. Maybe if you shave his minutes a little bit. But I just think that there's still, overall in their games, there's a drop off from Bradley to Martinez as far as what they can do, and that at least that's been what appears to be their judgment so far. So we'll see. But you have an argument there. I mean, you could see Martinez 5, 6, 7 minutes a game and trim 3 from Bradley and maybe a minute each from Love and Lewis and see how it goes. But I don't know. This is interesting because I think right now this team's at a spot too where they can't really afford to do too many experimenting. This team needs to win some games.
So UCLA has won a lot of games. They are 8-1 this season. Their only loss came against New Mexico very early on. As you mentioned, they defeated Oregon at Oregon in a Big Ten game, which is still really weird. I can't tell you how strange it is to turn on like FS1 at 9:00, and you might even get like Don McClain on the call, but it's he's calling a Big Ten game.
Yeah,
like he's over on Big Ten Network. Like UCLA Oregon as a Big Ten game is something that we're all still getting used to. But anyway, what hasn't changed? Go ahead.
Well, I think I was just watching Mick Cronin's did a video today talking to local media there, and he said something to their guys like, this whole thing is weird. And he was referring to that game, and he was referring to the fact that Arizona's not in the same conference and that they're going to have to play in Phoenix. And it's what's happening in college sports and college basketball.
It sure is. But one thing that hasn't changed is the style of play of UCLA. They are, of course, very good defensively. They're allowing 55.1 points per game, 37.5% field goal percentage. They have one of the biggest players in college basketball. Doesn't play that many minutes, but in a day, Mara, who's got that kind of presence that only a 7'3" guy can have. And they're a typical UCLA team in that way. I know that you haven't gotten too deep into the scouting report and the matchups and all that, but what are your initial thoughts on what that game might look like on Saturday?
Well, you're right, Michael. I mean, it is a kind of a back to the Mick Cronin basic team. They're just really good defensively, and what they did is they just upgraded through the portal. They got 4 new starters, and they didn't lose a lot of guys. He literally put guys on the bench. I mean, they have 3 guys, Stefanovic, Mara, and who was the other one?
Sebastian Mack or Dylan Edwards? Dylan Andrews.
Was starting last year, now coming off the bench. And I think it took a little while to work that out, but apparently it's working right now. So they're just I think they're number 4 overall in efficiency. They're really, pretty tough team, both inside and out. Like you said, they've got a presence with Mara there inside. They actually start Tyler Bilodeau, who's the big guy at Oregon State, kind of a 4 or 5, and they start and play him at both post spots, and then they can bring Mara in, with that big look. And then Bilodeau kind of, is a stretch player, can be a stretch player offensively anyway. So it's just, they have a couple different looks there. They have veterans. They got Sky Clark, Kobe Johnson, good defensive players as well. Just it's an impressive collection. And I think, just the fact that they had so much newness, that it's a credit to them that they're able to transition into this, and put it together pretty well this year. I think that, that New Mexico loss, like you referred to, is the second game of the year. And that was when they were still trying to get it together, and they didn't have that hard of a schedule, and certainly not as tough as Arizona's. So, you got to factor that in too. But I think beating Washington the way they did, and then winning at Oregon, shows you that they're clearly got a lot going on at this point.
Tyler Bilodeau had one of the best games of his career against Arizona last year, didn't he?
Yeah, up there, I think you're referring to. Was that was the
that game was that was January 25th Oregon State won that game. He was 8 for
Yeah,
10
yeah,
from the floor. He had
yeah,
22 points. Kind of the game of his life
yeah.
in some ways.
Yeah, I think, well, honestly, I think you could make an argument that Arizona actually sent a couple guys into the portal to get to do well in NIL with with the way they not only he played, but just the outcome of that game. What was the 3-point shot that
Say Arizona's making money for
well,
players
I think Jordan,
on
yeah,
other teams. Is that what you're saying?
well, that's what I'm saying. Like Bilodeau and I think Jordan Pope. I mean, literally, Jordan Pope was the guy who hit that 3 at the buzzer in that game to win it. And I think I remember going on Twitter looking at afterwards, there were memes about how he just, made a bunch of money in the portal. And well, maybe he did because he left and Bilodeau left. And Bilodeau was like a guy, Bilodeau was like a classic Oregon State guy, Northwest kid, under recruited, solid. His parents were athletic. They were athletes and he was playing really well for them, kind of a system guy. Yeah, but he, played too well for Oregon State, and now he's gone, and he might arguably be UCLA's best player right now. He's certainly probably the most overall, box score filler guy for them at this point.
Fascinating how this world works these days, and he's getting another crack at facing Arizona, obviously a different Arizona team than the one he saw last year. So this game is at Footprint Center. It's not at McHale. It's not at Pauley Pavilion. I wrote a huge column a couple weeks ago about my experience of going to the North Carolina-Kansas game at Allen Fieldhouse. And the main theme of that piece was it's so much better to have this game on campus than to have it at a neutral site. And I know that this is a passionate topic for, and I lost Bruce again. Good. I know this is a passionate topic for you, Bruce, the neutral site games versus having the games on campus. Apologize for some technical difficulties that we've been having. This is what happens when you put a couple of Northwestern journalism majors on a podcast. We're not technical experts, so apologies for that. I was saying, Bruce, that I know that you're very passionate about this subject of the neutral site games versus on campus. Having the series renewed is a good thing for sure. It's a little disappointing that it's not taking place here in Tucson or in LA. What do you think about the venue where UCLA and Arizona will be meeting on Saturday?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. I mean, I think, in fact, more so than a lot of series, like you could say, okay, if Arizona's playing Kentucky and they're not going to play in McHale, but they're going to play in Vegas or something, that's okay because they're playing Kentucky. But UCLA and Arizona have so much history in their own buildings, and it just seems really odd that they're doing it this way. And but I think it appears to be a function of the NIL era. Where there are more opportunities for NIL events around these things. They can basically create more money for these collectives around these teams, and that's why they're doing it. I know Mick Cronin has said that. He told me that, he said there's promoters involved. You got to pay players is what we got to do. And then today he told the LA guys, it's weird, but it's the way we're going. It's the modern game. It's not the good old days anymore. And, he's right. It's possible. I mean, I've heard there's some rumblings that somewhere within UCLA, maybe Arizona too, didn't really want to play a home site. There's been obviously, I think UCLA not real happy about that, especially after that Spitted incident. There's a situation at McHale where you've got to exit the court right next to the student section. I don't think they really like that, but I don't know whether that resulted in the series being moved to a neutral site. But there's a lot of factors, and probably it does have a lot to do with money, and also when you play these neutral games, the TVs and the promoters get involved, and they can kick in a lot of money to the teams. And when revenue sharing gets started next year or the year after, they could be kicking in money for that goes towards that aspect of it too. And whereas at McHale, it's a fixed thing. They can only get so much for the ticket price, ticket sales, et cetera, and they're kind of locked there. So it's an opportunity in a number of ways to get more money flowing. Basically, I think that has a lot to do, a lot, if not everything, to do with this.
Yeah, there obviously are a lot of Phoenix-based Arizona alumni and
Yeah,
fans, so
yeah,
they'll probably turn out. I don't know how many people are going to
yeah,
travel up there
yeah,
from here. We'll see what the atmosphere and environment are like.
yeah,
It could be decent. I mean, having it, it's better to have it in a basketball arena than like a football stadium.
yeah.
At least it's a little
Well,
smaller.
yeah, and I think actually, I think Lloyd, and I think the people at U of A, I think Tommy Lloyd's pretty committed to trying to have a decent game in Phoenix pretty much every year to keep that those alumni and frankly the members of the NIL collective that happen to live in Phoenix, they want to keep those people happy. And so they're, and actually last year I was a little bit curious about it going into it, but they played Alabama at the Footprint Center last year, and I kind of wondered, I think it was Wednesday night or some Tuesday night or something, like, yeah, I just wondered what kind of atmosphere they have, and it was actually really good. I was surprised. I mean, it wasn't McHale at its best, but it was pretty close. I mean, and certainly for an NBA arena to have that kind of vibe was interesting, and I would think they'll get that Saturday. And then when they play in LA, maybe they do. There's certainly a lot of Arizona alums in LA, tons of them, and then UCLA fans. That could be good. And then the Vegas game probably has more to do with whatever day they pick for that. If it's a day when people can get there, then that might be good too. But it's still, yeah, again, still not quite the same as campus sites. As you said, in Kansas, it's true here. Kansas, Lexington, probably almost everywhere. It's better on a campus as far as atmosphere.
We're about to find out with the football playoff, with the first round games being on campuses, how awesome that's going to
Yeah,
be compared to how relatively sterile it will be when they move when they go to the quarterfinals, and those are at bowl sites. I
yeah,
think
and
the teams that get the buys or might get buys in the future, they're going to see what it looks like that first weekend, and they're going to be like, I want to do that. We want to do that too, because there's nothing quite like, um, you know, being on campus for a big game like that. And then this is not the same exactly for basketball, but with football, with so many postseason games being on the road, there's only so much that fans can afford in terms of travel. And
yeah,
if you give
well,
them one more game at home, it's one less trip they have to make.
yeah, absolutely. I think it's worse in football because you don't know until a week or two before, sometimes week to week, depending on what level of the playoffs it is, if they're even going to be there and where that is. And then what do you do? Book a last minute plane flight and a last minute hotel. And if it's holiday time, are you going to give up your Christmas shopping or whatever? Like, there's just so many obstacles to having games that aren't on campuses, at least in this situation for basketball. That's been on the schedule that is going to be in Phoenix since whatever it was last spring or something. People know, people can plan around it, so it helps that way. But being on campus is just a whole different deal. I mean, I think in Arizona's case, they can maybe argue that this is sort of the end of the semester. Certainly, if you get deeper into December, maybe
Yeah, the
that's the
students aren't on campus anyway, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the best time to do it. And I know Washington State for years always would play those holiday games in Spokane because there was literally nobody in Pullman, and on a much different scale. That's kind of it can maybe at least that gives you and maybe an excuse, and maybe in some cases you can get an environment there that's pretty good. In fact, because like I think the example I'm thinking of is Tennessee. Tennessee played at McHale. I believe it was like the 23rd of December or something a couple of years ago, and it was okay, but it definitely lacked without a full student section there, no question.
So Phoenix is certainly not the most interesting place that you will have gone this season. You spent several days in the Bahamas. This will be our last question, our last topic here.
Yeah.
Give us your best Bahamas story. Tell us what that whole experience was like.
Oh man. Well, I had a different experience than the team because they were staying in Paradise Island, which is like this is basically like Las Vegas in the tropics kind of thing, where it's casino, big resorts, pools. You see it obviously the ESPN. That's all they show all week is all these water slides and all that stuff. But I stayed in downtown Nassau, which I thought was interesting. It's a little bit parts of it are look kind of sketchy or whatever, but it's safe enough, and it's just, it was interesting. I mean, it was a British colony until about 50 years ago or something, and people are it's a different kind of culture there now. I think basically I think honestly the thing that stands out to me was just the fact that in town, when it comes to life, the beaches downtown, everything comes to life, and then about 4 o'clock the big ships start pulling out and everything shuts down. And if you're staying there like I was, it's a struggle to find places to eat. In fact, one night Paradise Island all their restaurants were closed when I got done working late, and I literally had the taxi driver stop me at a drive-through for KFC because it was the only thing open after 11 o'clock on the entire island. And so we sat in this drive-through at KFC for like 20 minutes, and he charged me like an extra $10 in waiting time. But that's the way it was, and that's it's just a different deal that way. But it's scenically it was cool. I think getting over that island, there's a way you can walk across the bridge. I took that one day, and then there's a little ferry boat. It's kind of hard to find. It's not very organized. But it's a fun little ride around. You go around where the cruise ships are, and then there's like a yoga retreat on the edge of Paradise Island. Then you get to the resort part of it, and they drop you off and walk in and see the game. So it's kind of the getting around was kind of fun. And then obviously the basketball is different, high level, but also different because it's such a weird environment with that ceiling right over you, and everything's close in. There's literally only a couple thousand fans in there for most of the games, and so you can see everything really well, and it was fantastic that way. So it was kind of inside and out, both a really neat experience.
This is going to be the most interesting year you've had on the road, probably since you've been on the beat, since you're going to go to a bunch of new locations, venues, arenas, a lot of cool atmospheres, packed houses in the Big 12. I hope you have winter weather gear because you're going to encounter some cold weather as well. But love to hear the little travel tales from Bruce, who's like he's been everywhere, but he hasn't been to a lot of the places he's going to go to.
Yeah, I mean that's
this upcoming season.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's part of why I've enjoyed doing this for as long as I have, because I do love to travel and I love to see different places, even if they're not places that are on the top of everyone's list. Like people always say, well, you must not like Pullman. What's that like, or whatever. I think it's really cool, and the surrounding area is beautiful. But and yeah, some of these places I have, I think the arena environments in the Big 12, they're pretty well regarded. I mean, they're going to be really hard for Arizona to play in, so that'll make a lot of intrigue there. And then, yeah, there's a lot of places I haven't been to. I mean, I've been to Kansas because Arizona's played them over the years, and a couple of these other cities. They played Baylor a few years ago, but this is, it's going to be different all the way around, and challenging kind of logistically to figure out how to get to some of these places because they're smaller places, whether it's worth trying to fly in there or fly into some other city and drive, or like Cincinnati, West Virginia is the first one, and I'm still debating what's the best way to do that, and cost effective, and it's challenging. So I may be driving a lot and just kind of crossing my fingers hoping the weather's okay. I don't know.
There's no better person to figure all this out than Bruce Pascoe. We thank him for being our guest on the Wildcast podcast. Reminder that Arizona faces UCLA on Saturday. That game is at 1 p.m. at Footprint Center in Phoenix. It will be televised on ESPN2. We thank all of you for listening to the Wildcast podcast. You can find us on Apple, Spotify. I think we're on YouTube Music as well. Justin Spears and I will undoubtedly be doing a football podcast in the not too distant future to discuss the carnage that has been inflicted upon the Arizona football roster via the transfer portal and what the future holds for the Wildcats in that sport. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.